Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. This is myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 4th of January 2025. And we are going to have to speak about quite a lot of stuff. There's an awful lot going on in the world, and indeed, I think the world is a particularly volatile place at the moment. And I'm looking at you, the US, and I'm looking at you, Germany, and I'm looking at you, goodness me, everywhere. Okay, let's start with the Baltics and the Nordics. So Tim White says, as threatened, Finland and Estonia have begun ordering ships to check in at their ports for inspection to ensure they're not breaking sanctions on Russia. Someone else here, Greg Sierra, has spotted this tanker fresh from Russia flying the flag of Greece get called in. So a Greek-flagged, possibly Russian tanker. This is what the Russian Shadow Fleet was created from. Essentially, a lot of Greek cargo vessels suddenly lost their Greek flags and went dark, and we're wondering where they went to. Well, part of the Russian Shadow Fleet, it appears. So they are getting serious up in that neck of the woods. In fact, that's because the Baltic Sea is becoming the scene of Russia's undeclared hybrid war against NATO, according to the Bild newspaper. First, the Russian military fired signaling ammunition at the Bundeswehr helicopters, says Anton Gerashenko. Then an underwater internet cable from Helsinki to Rostock was cut. Now there's an increase in drones flying over German training grounds and harbours. Quote, we are experiencing hybrid warfare. It's like the Cold War, German Federal Defence Minister Boris Pistorius said on Deutschlandfunk radio station. The Friedrich Neumann Foundation notes another danger in the region. Russia has turned Kaliningrad into a well-equipped military bastion with nuclear-capable missiles, modern air defence systems, extensive coastal defences and strong Baltic fleet, thanks to which Russia can threaten neighbours. Russian provocations in the sky have already become a routine. Last year alone, a total of 300 Russian aircraft were intercepted violating NATO airspace, most of them near the Baltic states. Like I said, we are at war. You can call it hybrid war, you can call it whatever. We are involved in World War III. And we need to accept that and get on and do something about it. Gabrielius Landsbergis, who is the former foreign minister for Lithuania and is an absolute staunch supporter of Ukraine and is always on point, says the following.
We have been asked to put a moratorium to our independence because people were so afraid of what will happen if this actually, becomes a new reality. And we basically didn't listen. We said, look, this is the only thing that we can do, right? Is fight for our independence, reclaim it back. This fact is not very often remembered, that if we would have listened to the voices of our Western friends, it's very likely that we would see Soviet Union in some form or the other still under the boot of Moscow and Kremlin. And Ukrainians, again, they're finding themselves in a very similar situation. And I would say, don't listen to those people. Just do the best that you can in order to defend your country, because that might be the only way to have your country when we're again.
So Landsbergis, his father was involved in the 1991. The dissolution of the Soviet Union and what took place in Lithuania and the Baltic states more generally. But, his father was involved in what happened with Lithuania. And the point here is that we were told by certain Western people that, hey, you need to pause your struggle to protect Russia from, we don't want Russia to collapse. We don't, all these issues with Russia collapsing. So actually you need to not precipitate that. And they were like, no, screw you, we're going to go and do this. Had they listened to those Western analysts, Lithuania would still be part of the Soviet Union or part of the Russian Federation, right? And wouldn't have their independence. And the same with the Ukrainians. You can listen to those who are afraid of X and Y happening, same with Georgia. Or you can forge your own path forward. I really should try and interview Landsbergis. If anyone can help sort that out. I just don't have time to connect with all these people, but if anyone can help out with that, that'd be fabulous. Poland has not invited Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his country's ambassador to a ceremony marking the start of Poland's presidency of the EU. So they've taken over from Hungary, and that ceremony of taking over presidency of the EU for 6 months, you would, I think, normally expect Hungary to be there as giving over the presidency to Poland. The decision was prompted by Hungary's granting of political asylum to Poland's former deputy justice minister, who is accused of embezzling public funds. Was he the guy that ran off to Kaliningrad or Russia initially? Anyway, Hungary appears to have given him refuge, and that's led to Poland going, well, screw you. Polish farmers, however, have launched a large-scale strike in Warsaw against imports from Ukraine and EU policies. Police reminded protesters that entry to the capital is prohibited for agricultural tractors and slow-moving vehicles. That's a real challenge there for the Ukrainians. Going over to Slovakia, though, quote, "We are not Russia." Thousands protest Fico's pro-Kremlin agenda in Bratislava. Approximately 4,000 people assembled, although that's relatively small. That's still, good, what we want to see, because I think Robert Fico is incredibly dangerous. It assembled in Bratislava on January the 3rd to protest Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico's pro-Russian policies, according to local media. Slovakia is quite interesting at the moment because of this. So what you had was Ukraine switching off gas to Slovakia, Hungary, etc., etc. And then Slovakia said, if you do that, we're going to not sell you back energy when you desperately need it. And then you have Bulgaria and Poland said, well, if they don't sell you it, we will. So, screw them. And Slovakia, I think, and I said this is only hurting Slovakia. Actually, Ukraine have the leverage here, especially given the willingness of Bulgaria and Poland. So Slovakia will continue supplying electricity to Ukraine despite threats from Fico, reports Erozias. State-owned SEPS, Slovakia's power grid operator, confirmed it will uphold its emergency assistance contract with Ukrainergo. Wow. Slovakia, says Euromaidan Press, remains committed to maintaining its energy support for Ukraine, despite Fico's threat to cut electricity exports to Ukraine over halted Russian gas transit. The country will continue its energy supply to Kiev. So Fico, I love it. Fico's powers reached its limits. He's a blabbermouth. To be fair, Slovakia would have lost out the money there. Not only are they, it's a bit of an issue for them, because not only do they lose that gas from Russia and then have to go and get it elsewhere, but then they will lose their ability to export energy to Ukraine, which is what makes them money, right? So you can't say, I'm going to stop doing this, I'm going to stop selling you stuff. Oh, then we don't sell stuff. Damn it. And obviously that was a bit of an empty threat. Right, German and French foreign ministers, so that Annalena Baerbock and French foreign minister, I forget his name. Anyway, they visited Syria. It's time for Russia to leave its military bases in Syria. Putin is the one who has long supported the Assad regime and turned a blind eye to its war. Today's trip is a clear signal to Syrians. A new political beginning between Europe and Syria is possible. However, two things actually. One worrying thing from me, I've got many books on evolution, and I've written extensively on the subject in the context of religion and how certain religious movements have eschewed the theory of evolution and essentially science and our own biological history. And Syria, the Islamic regime, or the Islamic government that is being put in place at the moment, it's being constructed, has apparently said that evolution will not be taught in schools. Oh dear, you're going down the wrong route there, and before you know it, you'll be ensconced in a theocratic educational landscape, and that is not good for anyone. So with my former hat on, philosophy of religion, this is not cool. Do not start getting rid of teaching evolution in schools. It is not a good move. Now, Russia is shifting from Syria to Libya, as I had hinted at before. Russian shifts gear from Syria to Libya. Ukraine's military intelligence has stated that the Tartus naval-based Russian forces and African Corps mercenaries await transport while landing ships and tankers are heading for the Syrian city. Armoured vehicles are already pulled out to the Vladimir region. We have seen, actually, I reported in this morning's Hits and Losses video, in the analysis on what happened to that Azerbaijani airline that was taken out. 2 Pantsir S1s were responsible for doing air defense around Grozny, and I think an S300 as well. And it was the claim that the S300 had come from Syria. So some Syrian stuff is not all going to Libya. Maybe some of it, or some Russian stuff in Syria, is going back to sort of Ukraine area. In that case, Chechnya. Yeah. Right, we're moving on to Transnistria, and we're going to stay on the subject that we have already dealt with today of gas, hydrocarbons, and the gas getting turned off. Here, unrecognized Transnistria, that annexed region of Moldova, has declined Moldova's offer to help purchase gas from European markets, opting to wait for Russian Gazprom to resume supplies. Moldova Gas interim head Vadim Cheban confirmed. So, Tiraspol in Transnistria, Moldova, has started turning off the electricity according to the schedule. Now local residents will experience all the presence of the Russian world that they so desire. So you've got this weird situation where it appears that the Russians have turned off gas. This isn't like the Ukrainians turning off gas. This is the Russians turning off gas to Transnistria as a kind of like way of fighting over Moldova. But Transnistria prefers to wait for Moscow instead of getting gas supplies from the European market. This is all a bit weird. So Euromaidan Press says Russian-backed Transnistria rejects EU gas despite supply crisis. The breakaway region faces an energy crisis and rolling blackouts while banking on Russian gas resumption, rejecting Moldova's offer for European supply alternatives. How long is this piece? Not too long. So the unrecognised breakaway Transnistria region did not take up Moldova's offer to purchase gas from Europe. Vadim Cheban, acting head of the Moldova Gas Company, stated in a comment to IPN that local authorities are hoping for the resumption of gas supplies from Russia's Gazprom. Transnistria, part of Moldova located on Dniester River and the Ukrainian border, is a self-proclaimed republic that declared independence from Moldova in 1990. The region has its own government, military and currency, but it heavily relies on support from Russia, which maintains a military presence there. Since the 1st of January, Transnistria stopped receiving Russian gas, leading to gas shortages for tens of thousands of household consumers and halting local industry operations after Ukraine's cessation of Russian gas transit. Meanwhile, the Russian gas giant Gazprom also cited unfulfilled payment obligations for stopping gas supplies to Moldova. Transnistrian authorities urged residents to resolve the issue using electric heaters as electricity remains an available resource. The Dnistrovskaya thermal power plant continues to operate on stockpiled fuel, oil and coal. Forecasts predict these resources will last until the end of winter, but with a sharp increase in electricity consumption to compensate for the lack of gas and the onset of colder weather, they could be depleted much faster. On the 3rd of January, rolling power outages were introduced in Transnistria. Earlier, Moldova Gas offered assistance to the leadership of the Transnistrian Tiraspol Transgas to purchase gas through European platforms after the region lost Russian gas supplies. In a response sent on January the 2nd, the so-called authorities of Transnistria rejected the offer, stating that it would lead to purchasing gas at higher and unstable prices. Tiraspol also stated that it expects the resumption of gas supplies from Russia's Gazprom within its framework of the contract, which is valid until 2026. Meantime, meanwhile, the refusal to take humanitarian aid from Moldova and consider EU gas deliveries likely came as Moscow, not local authorities, according to Politico, came from Moscow. Moldova's National Security Advisor, Stanislav Scrieru, said Russia is weaponizing the flow of gas to sow a crisis in Transnistria. This move is seen as a strategy to influence Moldova's upcoming parliamentary elections, where pro-Kremlin parties aim to gain control in the EU candidate state. And this is talked about in European Pravda as well, how the Kremlin is giving up Transnistria to regain control over Moldova. So let's just, this is only a short article here, but I think it gives us a much greater understanding. So Russia's cut off gas supplies to Moldova, including the Russian-controlled Transnistria region. An unprecedented energy and humanitarian crisis is erupting in Transnistria, which is expected to sharply escalate by mid-January and could peak within a month. On the first morning of 2025, all heating plants and the entire private sector in Transnistrian cities were shut off. Essentially, gas remains only in old apartment buildings where its use is limited to gas stoves, and in a few critical facilities such as parts of hospitals and some kindergartens. This is temporary, though. According to gas engineers in Tiraspol, gas for stoves in the northern part of Transnistria will come to an end in 10 days, and in Tiraspol, Bender, and Nestrovsk in 20 days. By February, Transnistria could be a gas-free zone without heating and electricity. In the southern part, the region lies a Moldovan DRES, so the thermal power plant, the only thermal power station in the country that remained under the separatist control after the war on the Dniester. In recent years, it's generated 50 to 80% of the electricity consumed by right bank Moldova in winter. The primary fuel for DRES is Russian gas, the same free gas that Russia had supplied. So from 1st of January 2025, the people of Transnistria stopped supplying electricity to the right bank. Now, right bank Moldova is buying electricity from Romania. According to official data, the coal from DRES is generating electricity for the left bank of the Dniester, and it will last for 50 days. This calculation does not account for the situation when electricity consumption sharply rises, which is exactly what's happening now with the cold weather on the way. By February, a full-scale humanitarian catastrophe may unfold. Why? Putin's goal is to create an unbearable, incredible crisis in Moldova and then offer a solution that would convince the West to persuade Ukraine to lift the ban on transit of Russian gas. However, it must be understood that the Kremlin's chances of success are low. The second, much more realistic goal of the Kremlin is to influence Moldovan politics ahead of the parliamentary elections, which are set to be held in 2025, no later than autumn, and will determine the government of Moldova for the next 4 years. The Kremlin needs to create as many problems as possible for the people of Moldova to maximise their dissatisfaction with the current government. The establishment of a pro-Russian government in Moldova is a goal that justifies all means. A pro-Russian government would be able to effectively halt not only Moldova's but also Ukraine's European integration, as the EU perceives both countries as a pair. This would also harm Ukraine's defence capabilities. Much will depend on Chisinau, that's not how you pronounce it, but anyway, reacts when and if a real humanitarian crisis unfolds in the region. The EU will play a key role here, as without its support, programs to assist Transnistria will fail. Ukraine may also take on the role of the force that saves Transnistria from the deepest humanitarian crisis. Free Russian gas was a foundation of the region's economy, scare quotes economy. This means that Transnistria will have no chance of further survival. Thus, after the transitional period during which the region will rely on external aid, Chisinau and Tiraspol will be forced to begin the painful process of reintegration. They got free gas from Russia. They will not get that anymore, and this is kind of the way of Russia holding over them, their kind of power, but also that Transnistria needs Russia. And without that, they fall apart. So the falling apart can be blamed on not being close enough to Russia, maybe. And that Russia just wants the people of Transnistria, but more widely of Moldova, to realise that any kind of energy chaos could be solved by Russia, and moving towards the EU will make things more expensive and more chaotic in terms of energy needs. That's their hope. And now, talking about energy, Euromodern Press shows this map. One map shows Russia's gas empire in ruins. All major pipelines to Europe have been cut off, except the Turk Stream, after Ukraine shut down its last pipeline to Europe on January the 1st. Our analysis explains how Putin burned his 50-year energy leverage over Europe in just 2 years, and why there's no way back. And I'll show you that article in a second. So here are the pipelines. The Nord Stream cut off. Then we've got one cut off into Belarus and into both Ukraine and Poland. Then we've got the Brotherhood and the Soyuz pipelines here. That's the what's the Brotherhood? What's the Russian? That's not anyway, Druzhba, I think is the word there. That's a Druzhba pipeline there. So these have been cut off. So that leaves just this one coming down through the Black Sea there and into the Turk Stream one into Bulgaria from Turkey. So yeah, that is the situation with the pipelines. The Euromaidan Press article is here. Let's just see. I think this. Oh no, it's not too long. So, what do they have to say? The end of an era. Russia loses its gas grip on Europe. The cessation of Russian gas transit through Ukraine and Europe's gradual weaning off of Russian gas supplies marks a truly historic moment. We're witnessing the end of an era. Europe's long-standing energy dependence on Russia is finally drawing to a close. Legacy of dependency. The Soviet gas flow to Europe began in the 1960s. When West Germany signed the first gas deal in 1970, few could have predicted the scale of future dependency. 1973 global oil crisis, triggered by the assertiveness of the Middle East monarchies, only accelerated Europe's quest for diverse energy sources, ironically pushing it further into Soviet arms. Moscow proved remarkably accommodating in negotiations, primarily because the regime's survival hinged on oil and gas revenues. The eagerness manifested in major infrastructure projects, the Urengoy-Pomeroy-Uzhhorod pipeline in 81, followed by Yamal Europe in 84, though the latter wouldn't become operational until 96. During this period, Europe and the USSR maintained a strictly professional relationship. Their energy partnership remained remarkably stable, weathering political storms that might have disrupted other trade relationships. Well, we can see this happening in Ukraine, where they're literally at war, and it's taken until the 1st of January 2025 for Ukraine to shut off the Russian gas going to Europe. So energy, people need energy that much that you'll be willing to be at war with another country and still allow that country to supply energy through yours. It's quite incredible. You would have thought that would be turned off on day one of the war, but actually there's money involved. Ukraine need that money, Europe needed that gas, and it had to wait until just now for the contract to come to an end for it to be switched off. During this period, Europe and USSR maintained those strictly professional relationships, and by 1985 gas exports had become the USSR's primary source of foreign currency. Russia's inheritance of the Soviet gas infrastructure in 91 set the stage for the next chapter. While the 1990s saw intense negotiations over the Ukrainian pipeline control, everyone needed revenue after all. Gas remained primarily a commercial matter. And then the Putin era came from commerce to weapon. The dynamic shifted dramatically in the 2000s, driven by two major factors. First, post 9/11 chaos in the Middle East reshuffled global energy politics. Second, Putin and his associates masterfully crafted corruption-laced deals that ensnared European and Ukrainian business circles and political figures. Gas transformed from a commercial commodity into a political instrument. Now, I was speaking to someone on the back channels who has been involved in sort of gas and natural resources in the region. You're talking Georgia, you're talking Ukraine, over the decades, and people don't realize, and I think possibly the incoming administration, in their naivety, political naivety, in being not establishment. So people like to slag off deep state and establishment politics and blah blah blah, but if you have people that just want to come in and burn everything up and start again, you don't realize what's going on underneath the bonnet, underneath the hood. Right, there's an awful lot going on with Ukraine and Georgia that has been going on for a long time. One of the things is that the US has been trying to wean Europe off Russian gas for decades. And this is kind of part of what we're talking about here. Nord Stream, much rather, the US would much rather Europe take on American oil and gas. Now, I know we've heard Trump talk about this, but that's a relatively recent thing. He's been threatening the EU with tariffs if they don't take on more oil and gas. You've got to understand that Ukraine is important for hydrocarbons, oil and gas, but also for rare earth metals and lithium and manganese and all these other elements that we've heard Lindsey Graham talk about as a way into attracting Trump to support Ukraine. There's an awful lot happening that has been happening for decades, where you've got foreign ministries in the US. You've got your departments who are involved with foreign diplomacy, but also the Department of Defense, but also private companies involved in the whole area with kind of gas and and rare earth metals and natural resources, etc., etc. That things have been developing for an awful long time. And if you have relatively naive people like, I think, probably J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, really, people who aren't involved in the establishment coming in and wanting to burn everything up, they don't understand all of this stuff and all these strategic requirements for the US. I think that's partly why Trump has come in and then been quiet for a long time on Ukraine, because he's probably being briefed on some of the more important aspects of this. And the hope would be that you get some kind of change of direction for the Americans. And by that, I mean change of direction from where Trump and his team were going to head, being tempered by what the Biden administration already know, right? Which is partly why they're going to be supporting Ukraine, is due to these other strategic elements that have been bubbling away for decades. Anyway, Nord Stream 1's construction began in 2001, while 2006 to 9 saw Russia aggressively vying for control over Ukraine's gas transit system. The early 2010s brought plans for additional diversification routes. By the time Russia annexed Crimea, Europe's dependence on Russian gas seemed unshakable. Remarkably, this dependency survived the Crimean crisis, though the EU made modest efforts to diversify its energy sources, particularly through LNG, liquefied natural gas imports. Significant change only came when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, or more precisely, with Ukraine's successful resistance. In fact, Russia found itself in a rut after attempts to weaponize gas supplies to the EU after invading Ukraine, which led to the shutdown of major pipelines. The Asian market myth. Claims that Asia could replace Europe as Russia's primary gas market ignores several crucial realities. The Asian market remains a distinctly inferior alternative, even as a stopgap measure. Several factors make this evident. Logistics heavily favour Europe. The most existing infrastructure points westward, making European delivery both cheaper and faster than Asian alternatives. European market dynamics historically yielded higher prices, as competition and environmental regulations made Russian imports particularly attractive. Russia's self-inflicted reputation damage through political manipulation and warfare has severely limited its negotiating position for long-term contracts in both Europe and Asia enjoys abundant alternatives with shorter supply routes. China, the prime potential customer for Russian gas, has diverse options from Qatar to Turkmenistan, Iran to Southeast Asia and Africa. Putin's strategic defeat here, this shift represents a profound political and economic setback for Putin's Russia. The implications are far-reaching. The financial impact of losing the European market will significantly reduce foreign currency earnings and exacerbate budget deficits. 2. Russia has surrendered one of its primary tools for influencing European politics through corruption, explaining the anxious reactions from figures like Fico and Orban. 3. Europe's aggressive pursuit of alternatives from American LNG to Norwegian and Algerian supplies makes Russia's return to the market improbable even after the war. This situation perfectly exemplifies how Putin has sacrificed a crucial instrument of economic stability originally designed to sustain the USSR and later Russia for short-sighted political and military adventures. It stands as testament to his place among Russia's most strategically inept leaders, rivaling the missteps of Nicholas II. So we'll finish here because I did US stuff separately. But I think this, actually maybe not, we probably got time. This is really, really important. I think this is a really good point, is that Russia has not only shafted themselves in terms of being able to use gas as leverage over Europe. They've lost that now, and they're going to have to get, more expensive. They have to set up the infrastructure to get that gas to other markets. That will make that more expensive, and they won't be able to command as good prices. And that's a long-term thing. You have to invest a lot in order to eventually sell all of that later down the line. But right now, they're kind of screwed over. That Ukraine turning off the gas is $6 billion worth of trade suddenly being turned off for Gazprom. But the fact of the matter here is that if Europe then replace Russian hydrocarbons with other sources, and that becomes embedded, if the war stops and Russia suddenly come on friendly terms again, those bridges have been burnt, and Russia are going to be unable to muscle into that marketplace again. So I think this is incredibly important, needs to be understood in the context of this war really well, because a lot of this war isn't just about, like I keep saying, it's not just about tanks and guns. This is about a political war, an economic and trade war. This is about an information war. It's about a cyber war. This is about all of these different elements that we might call hybrid war, whatever, but this is war, and part of this war concerns hydrocarbons, or a significant part. This is how Russia makes its money, predominantly, and it's done itself over. And then the question is, how long can it sustain its war efforts given where it's going in terms of gas? Now, I did record the US segment on the end of this, but it was another half an hour plus segment. So the whole video was just over an hour long, and I thought I'd split it up into two. But please watch the American segment, because I do have a bit of a rant, and I'm doing that a lot at the moment. I'm sorry, but my goodness, there's enough that is rant worthy going on in the world. But it's also really important because I do mention the stuff about Musk again, and it's because it's come to a head of like certain people in the US claiming that the US should sanction the UK over the stuff that Musk is talking about. So we're potentially talking about a trade war with the UK, and the US is starting, it appears to, or at least Musk, at the center of the White House to be, is starting to have issues with Germany, the UK, Ukrainian supporters in America, i.e. the Biden administration. You're starting to see a pattern of attacks, and I don't know. There's some really worrying movements, I believe, that we are seeing. So please watch that US video. I think it has a lot of important things to say, or at least I have a lot of important things to say. Whether I said them well enough is, you can be the judge of that, but I think they're important. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.